Hi everyone, this is Ali John Chaudhary, psychotherapist, and today I'm here with Fern Schumer Chapman, author. And today we have a very important episode. We're going to be talking about goal setting for 2024. And this is an important episode for us, namely because of the fact that our community is starting anew, starting afresh. We're getting a lot of new people involved with us. And of course, we want to, of course, have people start up on the right foot for the beginning of the new year. So today we're going to be going into some of those goals. What do those goals look like? And also what we can do, of course, to make ourselves better people as we all walk through sibling estrangement. So Fern, thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful to have you here with us.
Well, it's wonderful to be back. You probably noticed we've had a bit of a hiatus here.
Yes.
And in fact, today we are creating our New Year's resolutions in February rather than January. I have a good explanation for that. Sadly, my mother passed away in early January, and all my focus has been on her care as well as her passing. So it's been a difficult time, but I'm really happy to resume with you and some of my normal life. What we had wanted to do back in January and only are getting to it now is talk about 2024 goals. And I came up with 4 questions, which I think are worthy of our attention. What do you want to take with you from 2023? What do you want to leave behind in 2023? What are your goals for 2024? And how will you change to reach these goals? So I think that's probably a good starting point.
These are great questions to explore, of course, and I think that it's so important for us to look at what it is that, our community is going through, right? Because a lot of times it's our community is left, of course, shocked, angry, dismayed. Some people experience a sense of just being sad and overly vigilant as well, and a lot of times, we want to find ways to improve and self-empower ourselves, in light of our experiences with our brothers and sisters. So of course it's a great question, right? Where do we begin in 2024, right?
Well, and where we begin in large part is a reflection of where we stand. So what I mean by that is, were you the one who made the choice to cut off? Or are you the one who feels that you have been shunned? And a lot of times we're asked, why do we have both of those groups on the page? And I think that's a really interesting question that needs to be addressed.
You're absolutely right. I think that that's just an important topic that's been coming up of late in our community as well, too, right? Because there's all sorts of goals that can be personal, interpersonal, and such, that ultimately have to do with bettering ourselves.
I believe our goal is to speak to both sides of this
Yeah.
equation. And in a lot of ways, it's a little bit like a political situation. If you only listen to one side, you do not enlarge your perspective. So what I'm hoping is, by listening to us talk about both sides of this, or to hear the debate on the page, that you actually gain insight into why this has happened.
Absolutely, and I think that's really important that we, of course, bring these two different camps together, because it is the pain of sibling estrangement that brings us together, that binds us together, right? And
Mhm.
of course, if you're being estranged, you can experience a sense of rumination, replaying the past in your mind, of course, and the sense of trying to find a way to respond to adverse situations by filling in the blanks when it comes to incomplete information about a cutoff with a sibling. Like, this is a typical mental pattern that people will go through oftentimes. And people can, of course, experience debilitating emotions like sadness, as well as feeling of shame and anger as to what's happened, right?
Yeah, a lot of shame and anger. And again, our goal is to try to reduce some of that, reduce some of the stigma, and also give insight into why you feel angry.
Yeah, exactly. And the people that had to estrange, of course, well, the challenges are different, right? It implies that you had to make the counterintuitive decision to take space from someone. And
Right.
of course, this can lead to all sorts of questions of doubts that can transfer into self-judgment, and in some cases, doubling back and forth on our decision, right? Should I be doing this or shouldn't I be doing this, you know?
And I think it's important to recognize that estrangement may not necessarily last forever. These situations get hot and somebody pulls the plug on them and takes a break and may eventually come back. But it's not necessarily a life sentence. In fact, there are a lot of people I talk to, as well as some of the research shows that estrangement is sometimes just a moment in a life.
Exactly. So it can be a particular chapter that we sometimes go through that can be temporary, just like it can be something that is ongoing and maybe more long lasting, right? And that's the thing with the grief of a living person, right? That's the thing that happens, right? It's the grief of what we thought family could be, you know, and that can cause us to put ourselves into question or blame or disparage ourselves if we're not careful, right?
And any relationship waxes and wanes. It's just how far do you go with this?
Exactly. So I think this is good for us to talk about because we want to, of course, help our community develop goals, right? And I think that it's really important that we recognize what it is that can be necessary for our own well-being, given the impact our siblings can have on our lives. You know, of course, whether we had to estrange or we've been estranged, right? So let's talk about some of the goals that basically we can have for this year. You know, a lot of times in the support group, I find that there's people talking about finding their voice, right? And I think this is an important one because it means that when it comes to a sibling bullying you, how they can sometimes even tend to hijack the narrative in the family for their own benefit, it can be really important to find your voice and to be able to essentially learn to face adverse moments rather than simply going through the process of shutting down, right?
Right. You know, it's interesting. I think that a lot of times people who don't know how to negotiate differences walk away from problems. And you see that pattern repeated over and over and over again in relationships.
Mhm.
So they storm out, and it's hard to tolerate that, but they don't have the skills to do anything different.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to learn to develop that ability, of course, you know, and it's okay to take space, I think, but also to recognize when it is appropriate to speak up, right? And I think that that's especially important. Now, of course, there can be the opposite goal, which is, of course, to stay silent, right? In some cases, our siblings can want us to have some sort of reaction in some shape or form. It's like they set us up to see where we can somehow do take a misstep of some sort that can be used against us. And this type of bullying is different than the first kind because it has more to do with eliciting a reaction and aggrandizing themselves, right? This is what bullying siblings can do, or changing the facts, you know. And we sometimes have to choose our battles, right? And that's precisely what it can mean when it comes to staying silent. It's not to jump at every single incident that happens, because if we do, then we become easily manipulated ourselves.
Yeah, and staying silent with intention to avoid escalation is one thing, but simply going along as a people pleaser is a trauma response.
Absolutely. When people tend to fawn, for example, and people please, in other words, that can sometimes be a trauma response, and we want to be careful that we don't enable a situation, of course, when it comes to that, right? So it's important to know the distinction between staying silent purposefully and doing it because we are not throwing gas in the fire versus going along with something, being complicit despite ourselves, right?
Right. And it's also important that we recognize exactly what we can get from somebody. Some
Yeah.
people are simply too limited
hmm
to behave in a different way. And I talk a lot about fantasy and expectation and estrangement because I see this over and over again. People are constantly wishing the relationship would be something else, or they're dreaming of a different sibling. But you have to get very real about your own expectations. This
Yeah.
is who this person is. They are not changing, and I can't expect a different relationship because of that.
Exactly, right? And that's really important to look at things in a realistic type of way, right? And limiting my contact with them is also something that we can do, of course, to
Right.
empower ourselves. You know, after going through adverse situations over and over again, it can be necessary to establish limits and make sure that you don't have to put yourself in a position where you're replaying the same scenarios over and over again. You know, so there are some things that we can prevent and others that we can't, right? And seeking to identify what it is that we control in order to have a different and more favorable outcome for ourselves, you know, is especially important. And I always bring people back to their own sense of that their sphere of influence, right? What is it that you have power over, right? And to be careful not to fall into traps where you want to somehow clear your name and such, you know. So I think that's especially important.
Right. I think the words that come to my mind are harm reduction.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right. So that's super important, you know. So, and it can take some planning when it comes to limiting your contact. What does that look like? You know, how would you like to navigate in particular situations? And of course, people can speak to us. Of course, if they want to come to me in private practice and therapy to discuss that, they can certainly look into some of those options. You know, I've had some people contact me for that reason. You've probably had some people as well reach out to you. So that's really important. And another aspect that's important to work on, especially, is to learn to improve my self esteem and love myself more, right? Seeing ourselves authentically without the filter of a distorted inner critic can be especially important when it comes to working in this area in our lives, right? Involuntary situations such as estrangement, of course, can cause us to get down on ourselves. And it's really important to make ourselves stronger and to learn that the best approval and acceptance really comes from within us, right?
So I would add to that that you want to also function without the filter of this distorted outer critic, such as your brother or sister. And you don't want to see yourself only as they see you.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really, really important to break free of that. And sometimes we can do that on our own with the work that we can do. Sometimes we may need help when it comes to that as well. And that's okay to reach out for that when it comes to breaking free of certain patterns like this, you know? So I absolutely agree with that. And um, seeking to trust in my ability to make decisions is also important, right? Because after a certain time, when you get talked down to, you get gaslighted, you get minimized or dismissed by a sibling or family member, you know, this can cause us to start to gaslight ourselves, right? And that's the danger when we take on the doubt, the feeling of doubt in our decision making, you know. So it's really important that we recognize our thinking and that we see if our approach is reasoned in such a way that can be helpful for us. So that way we free ourselves from this pattern instead of reliving it and making choices based on perpetual doubt.
This is a real challenge to how centered are you and how clear are you on who you are and what you stand for,
Yeah,
because you're under
absolutely.
attack.
Yep, exactly. So important for people to recognize that. So that's again something else that people can certainly work on, and that in the support group that I have, of course, I have a lot of people coming in and talking about this, especially, you know, and it's not easy to navigate this because it's about breaking free from those patterns and not falling into a sense of regression if there's interactions, of course, with some of our siblings and their behaviors. So that's really, really important, of course, to be mindful of that.
It's also challenging because these are some of the longest relationships you have. So
Yeah,
you somehow believe that this person knows you best of all,
yeah,
and you buy into what their perspective is. And that's not necessarily true or healthy.
exactly, exactly. And that's the thing that we have to break free of, right? And I think that that's going to be this year. I'm going to be talking more about authenticity, of course, and that has a lot to do with that particular aspect, which I think is really, really important, of course, to get us going when it comes to empowering ourselves. You know, and some of the more extensive work, of course, can have to do with identifying my triggers. You know, sometimes we need to learn more about ourselves, and the only way that that can happen is really by interacting with other people, right? And what is it that sets you off? What rabbit holes do you start to go down through when and you notice that when conversations start to go bad? What is it that starts to happen? In some instances, I've seen some families, some people in families become overachievers, right? Precisely because they wanted to prove to others that they're smart, so they didn't want to have that label of being called this, that, or etc. So do you tend to give up easily, for example? What was your value conditional in a family or with your siblings? So it really is important to see what you've taken on, and sometimes you need to have that through an individual follow-up with someone to be able to get through that.
Yeah, we react without knowledge, and it's important to replay and reflect on why we respond the way we do. And we've talked a little bit about the third eye and this idea of gaining some broader perspective on patterns of behavior. And I think that's what you're talking about here. Why do I respond the way I do, even to a friend? Maybe it's because a brother or sister treated you in the same manner.
Yeah.
Once you start to become aware of those patterns, you're sort of onto yourself.
Exactly, right? And I think that's really, really important. You gain more knowledge about who you are. You're investigating and seeing what buttons get pushed in that way, so that way you can alter that course, so it
Mhm.
doesn't go through the same thing over and over again. You know, and ultimately with this type of work, it does lead to breaking free of certain maladaptive coping patterns. And that's really important. Some of the things that we take on can sometimes be different types of core negative beliefs, right? That cause us to go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn,
Mhm.
right? And there can be some therapeutic work that's necessary in freeing oneself from these reactions. And it's really beneficial to name them, some of these core beliefs, so they don't get the best of you and cause you to react, of course, right? Because the I'm not good enough, for example, is a common one. Um,
Yeah.
I'm stupid, or I'm out of control, or I can't trust myself is another one that comes up. So there's all sorts of different types of negative core beliefs that people take on, unfortunately, and we don't have to be at the mercy of them. Once we identify them and we can objectify them, we can work through them enough
Mhm.
that our beliefs don't end up making choices for us.
Right. Challenging them.
Yeah,
We've talked about this idea of writing down one column of core negative beliefs and the other column of why it's not true. So
exactly.
those are definitely valuable ways to address some of this. I wanted to add, in terms of what I call the toolbox to cope, how do you achieve well-being? Well, and this fits right in with all the New Year's resolutions: exercise, cultivating new social relationships, getting out in nature, a gratitude journal or some sort of writing therapy, challenging ants, which is what we're starting to talk about there, automated negative thoughts, which is that inner critic, cultivating hobbies. I think a lot of times people get caught in their thinking and they don't have a distraction or a way to feel good about themselves through some sort of creative project. Controlling rumination and overthinking, and finally, helping others. That has been a great way to achieve greater balance.
Yep. I absolutely agree with that. I think that's really important. When you give of yourself, for example, like you say, you're focusing on something else. You're focusing on a higher cause, so that way you feel good about yourself, and it does actually help to boost us overall and make us feel better, because we transcend our situation altogether. So, Fern, you've given some wonderful practical advice, and we've looked at a lot of different goals for today in terms of what it is that can come up in our community, especially where people can start, because that's another question that comes up often in the support group, right? Is, well, where do I start? What do I start to work on? There's so many things I need to work on that I don't know where to start. So hopefully today we've been able to attempt to answer that question to help people, of course, give themselves a goal and perhaps take a direction that can be of benefit to them.
I would underscore what you said earlier too. Maybe 2024 is the year to begin to get some help and support and therapy so that you can move forward with greater well-being.
Mm.
And I would recommend that with you, me, others in the field. It makes all the difference.
Absolutely, especially with somebody that is mindful and knowledgeable on sibling estrangement and gets it. Definitely, that's definitely something that can be important in our process. So that way we can deepen and understand ourselves better and empower ourselves all the more. So, Fern, we're just about out of time. So I just wanted to ask you, what would be your number one resource for our viewers at this time?
Well, of course, what I just said about the counseling or coaching, but then, of course, if you decide to tackle it yourself, the Sibling Estrangement Journal is available, and it's a writing journal so that you can process some of the grief.
Yeah, very good. I absolutely agree, and I very much enjoy the sibling estrangement journal too. My number one resource, outside of counseling and private consultations and such, for us, is basically being able to look at the immersive workshop on building and strengthening my self-esteem after my sibling estrangement.
Mhm.
So I'm starting that up in April, and I would very much like to offer this again. This would be my fourth time, and this is exactly some of the goals that we've talked about today. We'll be touching upon in that particular workshop. And it's a chance for a few people to sit down with me and deepen some of these experiential tools that I've been working on to be able essentially to go further and to tackle a lot of the negative core beliefs and the triggers that can sometimes happen in our lives. So very important for us to take a very healthy and empowering direction for ourselves for 2024. That is one of those ways. So thank you so much for doing this, Fern. It's wonderful to have you here again. And of course, my condolences for the loss of your mother.
Right.
It's understandable that you were away for, of course, that time. And I'm very pleased to hear that we will be able to continue again for the new year and to be able to continue to empower and strengthen our community and offer a voice for sibling estrangement. So thanks again for doing this.
Well, wishing all of our viewers the best for 2024.
Wonderful. You take care, Fern.
Thanks.
Thank you. Talk again. Bye bye.